In that tweet, what I have written is that the father of the regime change operation is none other than Shri Ram. So, from everything we have seen in the contemporary world, in it, we constantly hear that warfare, especially modern warfare, has come from the West. So, we need to understand that there is nothing in the world that has not already happened in the Sanatana Samskriti, right? So, these regime change operations, the very first instance we see is in the Ramayan, showing how Sri Ram had Ravan removed and replaced him, installing Vibhishan on the throne instead. So, if you are looking for an example of regime change, well, it is right there in our Shastras, in the Ramayana. Okay. And besides this, we also need to understand that every single one of those, all of the strategies of warfare are included in it. And including that, governance is also a part of it. For instance, you can see something that we call representative governance. So Bharat, who is his brother, he takes his sandals, you see, and places them upon the royal throne of Ayodhya, and he runs the governance in Sri Ram's absence. So this is the entire concept, the one of representative governance, wherein if your core leader, if he is outside the state, it does not mean that the entire governance will come to a complete standstill. So you can see the provision for representative governance is also present here in the entire history of ancient India. In addition to that, you will see the entire story of the attack on Lanka. In that, Lord Hanuman, or Bhagwan Hanuman as we call him, he is sent over, and it is not just in the capacity of a diplomat, but it was also something like a final warning. And he was also functioning as a spy. So he also brings back complete and total information about Lanka when he goes there. And you also get to see that when the negotiation that takes place in Ravan's court ultimately fails, then you can see how Hanumanji proceeds to set the entire city of Lanka on fire. He also goes and meets Mother Sita and brings back a complete detailed account of Lanka, including what its map is like. And after coming back, he tells the whole army. So you see the element of spy work there as well. Okay. And what kind of spy and diplomat was he? He was one who had all those powers with which he could take on absolutely any form he wanted. From what we ourselves have seen in the pictures, we can only tell you about that part. In reality, who really knows how many powers he must have had? But you can clearly see how his size is shown to become very large and then very small in that motion picture that was created. And he also goes on to face all of those asuras, all of the demons. He enters after facing them. Okay, and crossing each asura's post, that also involves all kinds of strategies of defense. So this entire strategy for war, okay, this whole army gathers together. There's a whole process for that too. And besides that, which are the other kingdoms that give their own armies to Bhagwan Ram for support? So you can also see the strategy of forming alliances here. It is all included in this. Okay. If you look at the defense strategies, you will see that there are plenty of them here as well. For instance, take the case where Lakshman went and cut off Shurpankh's nose. This is what we call a swift riposte in modern warfare, which means that immediate action was taken. Okay. Then there is the Lakshman Rekha that Lakshman drew for the security of Sita Mata. This is what we call in modern warfare the first line of defense for a hard power. So if you look at the US Navy today, it is positioned so far away from the US mainland, far from the American population. Their access and security provisions that are in place in the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific, whether that is in the Middle East, it is spread out absolutely everywhere. So this is the same strategy, which we call the first line of defense that keeps Americans secure. How far from the main American population can you provide protection, right? So for Sita Mata, that Lakshman Rekha, that is the first line of defense. That level of security is the minimum provision that you must make. Okay, and besides this, you also see that there is spy work happening and there are regime change operations. And then in Lanka, you see what happens if Vibhishan's support is received. So Vibhishan also gave a great deal of important information to Bhagwan Ram in order to defeat Ravan. So you can see that not only did you carry out regime change operations, but you also went into that country where you had the person whom you were about to declare as the new leader, because India has never ever had this kind of mentality that we would want to go and capture someone else's land or take over their resources. Uh, so you can see how Vibhishan was brought into the alliance, and Vibhishan also gave them secret information. And then, after the regime change operation was complete, when Lord Ram departed from there, he placed Vibhishan on the throne. So, an entire concept of national security also emerges from this, which is that if the nations in your neighborhood do not follow the path of dharma, then you have to go there and carry out regime change operations as well. So, regarding regime change operations in the contemporary world, the entire narrative that runs around it is completely negative, and that is because of the Western style, which is all about capturing and takeover of regime change, is completely filled with negative intent because their objectives are entirely different. But from a dharmic viewpoint, we have to look at what Bhagwan Ram has told us, which is that if in your neighborhood there are governments that are anti-dharma, meaning they are promoting vidharma or adharma, which is adharma. So you see, that will have an effect on your geography. You will not be able to develop or progress in a peaceful manner. So for instance, if Mother Sita was abducted, then that is a symbolism of the fact that adharma was flourishing in your neighborhood. And the effect of that came directly upon your geography. If we look at this from today's perspective, you will come to realize how in Nepal, Bhutan, all of these monarchs who were the ones ruling there. So during the UPA government, there were a great many of these serious lapses that happened in national security. And because of which those monarchs were removed and democracy was brought in. And after that, there were communist entries into all of those governments, and the communist influence grew much stronger. So if you truly want to progress peacefully, then your neighborhood must also have governments that are willing to follow the path of dharma and move forward. So everyone knows about the nuisance of Pakistan. So in this case, we saw such a massive lapse in our national security that in every single one of your neighboring countries, all of those kinds of activities began to start, which go directly against India. So you have seen how in 1971, even though we were victorious, we did help Bangladesh get its freedom. But did we actually make sure to install the right kind of government there? One that is walking on the path of dharma? Absolutely not. So you can see what incredibly huge mistakes have been made by us. We must understand all this in national security. Okay, you saw Pakistan's case in 1971, 90,000 plus Pakistani prisoners of war, all of whom we just released. Why did not we decide to keep them as a Pakistan regiment in India? Right? And we would have kept the responsibility for Pakistan's external defense and banned them, telling them you are not supposed to keep a separate army. So all this that we are facing today after 1971 from Pakistan, none of this would have ever happened. So Bhagwan Ram has taught us here that even regime change operations can have a very positive intent. It can also be for establishing dharma. All right. So when it comes to all the war or defense strategies that exist, it is possible for them to have both positive and negative intents, right? So the thing that we currently see in the contemporary world is what they call gunboat diplomacy. What that means is, if the US's foreign minister, or as they call him, the Secretary of State, happens to go and visit some smaller nation, then bombers will fly over that nation from above, and only then do the negotiations take place. It is a kind of a show of power, as they call it, right? So that is what is called negotiating from a position of strength. Is not that right? Now, whether their intent is positive or negative, that is a different matter entirely. But what I am telling you is that there is nothing in Sanatan that was told which has not happened or will not happen. Everything is covered within it. So you will see, for instance, how Bhishma Pitama, he practices what we call gunboat diplomacy, and how he travels all the way to Gandhar. He takes his entire forces with him and ultimately asks for a hand in marriage for Dhritarashtra. So you see, the father of gunboat diplomacy is also an Indian, right? So in the contemporary world, you will see, well, Acharya Chanakya has talked about everything. He talks about how covert warfare happens, how deceptive warfare happens, and even how open warfare happens. So you see, this is all there, laid out in our scriptures in complete and full detail. Okay. For instance, we see this COVID virus. This was also a type of biowarfare, you see, right? So this topic is also covered. This is also covered in the Ramayan and all of these texts, exactly how diseases can spread. Okay. And then when Hanuman brings that mountain for Lakshman, because he was struck by a certain arrow that was used, which was a special, very deadly kind of weapon against Lakshman and Ram. So he lifts the whole mountain and brings it, since he cannot find the Sanjeevani herb, right? So this is also a kind of talk about vaccine formulation. The idea is that this is not a medicine which is readily available. You have to search for it, or you have to actually make it. Its formulation will have to be created, right? Okay. And you will also see that this same concept is in the Mahabharat as well, right? How Shakuni Mama employs various strategies. He constructs the entire Lakshagriha and then sets it ablaze, right? So all of this is there. There is absolutely nothing that is not covered in Sanatan. It is just impossible. Okay. And you have also been told the story of how Shri Krishna, without even lifting a single weapon, he is fighting the entire war without lifting a weapon. He is giving guidance. He is telling Arjun that you must do your karma. I am the Sarthi, right? So from this you see that even without lifting a single weapon, it is possible that you can win a war. There is a complete provision for this as well. And we have even seen this in modern times in Myanmar, how the kind of terror that the Rohingya community was spreading to bring a solution to that problem, how a Buddhist Sant from Myanmar himself took up the responsibility without lifting a weapon. And in order to solve the Rohingya problem, he had a very great contribution in that. So this entire terror network that was running at the time of the Rohingya community in Myanmar, that particular Sant has a very big hand in its solution. So all of our Sant need to understand this, that this whole idea of individual liberation, the concept that one has to attain moksha, you will only be able to do that entire process when the real world security, the security of your civilization is properly maintained. So each and every one of our sons, they are not just spiritual gurus, but they are also what we call civilizational gurus. This is because this education system has changed, and the British one is the one that is currently running. So we do not really know the importance of our Sant and Mahatmas, just how big their role is in our civilizational security. Right? So it is not just about spirituality over there. It is about preserving the entire culture as a whole. All right. So in this, you will see this entire war strategy laid out. Okay. You will see all of this inside the Mahabharat. For instance, how Gandhari, the character, she actually comes from a very specific geography, and on her eyes there is a blindfold that is tied. So in a way, you have Dhritarashtra, who is always shown as blind, and this can be seen as the blindness of secularism, you could say, that he is completely unable to see what his own radical children are doing. You have a mother who has a blindfold on, and she is powerless to do anything to stop her radical children. All right. You also see the part about how 100 sons are born. What this means is, it has been shown that the adharmi people, they can actually be greater in numbers, right? So you are being given all the hints right here. She is coming from that specific geography, and she's getting married to secularism. And along with her comes a Shakuni, who in today's contemporary world, we could probably call an Abrahamic cleric, the one who goes on to radicalize the children. Okay. So think about how Shakuni Mama radicalizes all of the Kauravas, every single one of the 100. All right, he is the one who puts this poison into their minds, telling them that the Pandavas are your enemies. So it is like the entire discrimination that we see in the contemporary world of Abrahamic religions, the one between believers and non believers. In the exact same way, Shakuni Mama engages in the poisoning of minds to create a blanket separation of treatment between the Pandavas and Kauravas. He tells them that the Pandavas will snatch away your resources. He scares them and he radicalizes them. And secularism, which is represented by Dhritarashtra, is unable to do anything. So you see this entire dynamic, how all right, the disrobing of Draupadi also happens. And it is shown that when you have certain areas that have become radicalized, in those places, the honor of women can be in great danger. You can clearly see this symbolism there as well. How they can be exploited, because the Mahabharat has already mentioned all the vices that could possibly exist in the world. And then you have to make the decision whether you stand with dharma or with adharma. So the Pandavas, despite being fewer in number, because they are on the side of dharma, they can counter them if God himself becomes their companion. So the role of a guru is also very clearly explained in it. Okay. So you will find all the strategies for defense, warfare, and governance. It explains how things like liquor, alcohol, and what we call are found, like dice games, gambling. All of these vices are clearly laid out right in front of you, showing that these are the vices humanity may have to face. So one should not fall into it. Okay. So you will find all of this, absolutely everything, within ancient India.